Book 3, Chapter 10, of the imputation of Adam's sin to all his posterity, narrated by David Clark. Having considered the disobedience of our first parents and the sad effects of it to themselves, I shall next consider the concern their posterity have in it, and how much they are affected by it. There are two things follow on it with respect to them: the imputation of the guilt of it to them, and the corruption of nature derived to them from it. I shall begin with the first, as being previous to the other, and the foundation of it, and which is expressed in very strong terms, Romans 5:19. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners. The apostle is upon the doctrine of justification by the righteousness of Christ, and whereas it might be difficult in the minds of some how any could be justified by the righteousness of another, and he had to do it greatly with the Jews as well as the Gentiles, the former of which might better understand the doctrine of imputation of Adam's sin to his posterity, or how all men are made sinners by his sin, than the doctrine of justification by Christ's righteousness. He observes, "It is easy to conceive how men may be made righteous by the obedience of another, namely, through the imputation of that obedience to them, as it is to conceive how all men are made sinners by the disobedience of one man, even through the imputation of that disobedience to them. To set this doctrine in the best light I can, I shall 1. Observe the act of disobedience by which men are made sinners. 2. Who they are that are made sinners by it. 3. In what sense they are made so through it. First, the act of disobedience, whose it is and what. Whose it is sometimes expressed by one that sinned, and more than once called the offence of one, and yet more clearly by one man's sin entered, and so called one man's offence, and one man's disobedience. For it is not the sin of one of the apostate spirits by which men are made sinners, but the sin of one of their own species, one of the same nature, even the common parent of all mankind, who is expressed by the name. Where this offence and disobedience is called the transgression of Adam, and so in 1 Corinthians 15:22, in Adam all die. Being all in him, and having sinned in him, death comes upon them for it. But then, this is to be understood of Adam, not to the exclusion of Eve, who was also in the transgression, and first in it, and was the mother of all living. They both have the same nature, the same appellative name, man, the same proper name, Adam. Where of the same nature? Nay, Eve was formed out of the rib of Adam, was flesh of his flesh and bone of his bones, a part of himself, and by their marriage relation became one flesh. They had the same law given them, which forbid the eating of the fruit of the certain tree. The same covenant was made with them, and they were both guilty of the same act of disobedience, and had a sentence of punishment pronounced on them both, and did not rest on their persons only, but is common to all their posterity, and still continues, which shows that their posterity, had a concern in their act of disobedience, in the guilt of it, since they share in their punishment, as all the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve do, as in the toil and labour of the one, and his return to the dust, so in the pains of childbearing, and in the other, and subjection to man. 2. What this disobedience was, which appears from what has been already said, it was disobedience to the law and will of God, in eating the fruit which he had forbid. So, disbelieving the word of God, and giving credit to the serpent. Now it was this one act of disobedience by which Adam's posterity were made sinners, and therefore is sometimes called the one sin, and the offence, and the one offence. So in Romans 5:16, Some copies read, by one sin, and so Romans 5:17, by one offence, and so in Romans 5:18 may be translated, as it is in the margin of our Bibles, it was a single sin, and the first sin committed in our world. I say in